From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Now, this all comes as President Trump this week is poised to upend global trade, promising to unleash those sweeping reciprocal tariffs he's dubbed Wednesday Liberation Day. Now, the scope of these tariffs and how punishing they will be remains unclear, but the president overnight promised to be, quote, generous. But economists, of course, warn that American consumers will ultimately pay the price for this, that costs could rise on everything from produce.
I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 28th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, reciprocal tariffs. Joining us to talk more about it is Ernie Goss McAllister, Chair and Professor of Economics at Creighton University. Thank you so much for being here and welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for having me here.
You bet. I want to start off just simply by defining tariffs.
Well, reciprocal tariffs, that's not what these are. I would call these retaliation, or they were initially placed on because of arguably for fentanyl coming across the border. Well, that's not a reciprocal tariff. But what is a tariff? It's an increase. It's similar to a sales tax, except it's not separate and distinct, and it's hidden to the consumer of the good. In other words, when you go to Walmart and buy a product, you see the sales tax. You don't see the tariff. The tariff is embedded in the price of the product, and that's paid for along the way, whether it's the producer that produces the product, the shipping that ships the product, or the trucker that picks the product up, or the wholesaler or the retailer. Along the way, that tariff is reflected in the prices along the way.
Okay, so when and how did these come into play? These tariffs, take us back in time, wherever you'd like, to just give us an idea of how all of this came about.
Well, it's called mercantilism. That's what we economists call it, whereby the idea somehow that if a nation exports more than it imports, it accumulates currencies of the nation the citizens of the nation that buys the product, and then the currency is used to buy something like gold. So you're accumulating gold, and it is mercantilism, it's called. And in 1817, David Ricardo, a British economist, said, no, comparative advantage. It's a law of comparative advantage. It's not called a good idea, it's called a law. In other words, nations compete or produce what they're most effective at and efficient at producing, and they trade for those items for which they're least competitive, least efficient at producing. For example, Nebraska produces soybean and effectively trades for bananas from Honduras. You know, that's how it's supposed to work, although it's being thrown, a monkey wrench has been thrown into the mess, to the mechanics of it over the last several years. Right now, globally, President Trump is not the only one. Globally, we've got many nations moving in what economists would call the wrong direction. I don't know any economist that agrees with tariffs like this. There are three reasons to have tariffs. This is not one of them.
Okay, give us the three reasons.
Infant industries. For example, if you have solar energy and you want to protect that industry, then you tack on a tariff, protect the U.S. solar energy industry, although it's long in the tooth to be called an infant industry now. A second reason would be for national security reasons. And a third reason is what I'm hoping these is to encourage and to negotiating stance to encourage other nations to reduce their tariffs. In other words, Canada reduces its tariffs, we reduce ours, Mexico reduces its tariffs, and likewise China. But I'm not certain that's what happened. The danger is, like the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1931, it resulted and prolonged the Great Depression of the 30s, because you get retaliation and all of a sudden it's like war. I mean, you didn't mean that. We all wanted peace, but someone fired the first shot and then the second shot. Well, that's the way tariffs are. And unfortunately, President Trump believes they're good. He says it's a beautiful word. Well, for economists, it's an ugly word. We do not think it's a beautiful word.
Well, let's take viewers back a little bit to February 13th and a memorandum that President Trump signed. Talk a little bit about, gosh, he's not even been in his second term here for very long, right?
Like
and so much has happened.
Right.
But let's take us back, Ernie, to kind of those initial conversations that President Trump was having about tariffs, and then we're going to kind of get to where we are today, wanting to remind our viewers we're recording this program on April 1st. But take us back a little bit here and introduce us to President Trump and his approach with the tariffs.
Well, his approach is, and I've supported many of his initiatives, this is just not one of them. And his approach is somewhat shotgun approach. In other words, talk about it, launch it, take it back, put it forward, take it back. And there's a lot of confusion. And the real danger here is that businesses, we do 2 surveys at Creighton University of bankers and manufacturers. And both they're on the sidelines right now, like, what's going on? There's so much uncertainty, and you see it in the stock market. The stock market's been running sideways to down since the first of the year. And a lot of that we can trace back to the uncertainty that businesses are facing right now, and investors. Investors see when this last week, the President said tariffs on automobiles. Well, what happened to GM? The stock price dropped by 6 to 7%. Ford's dropped by 3 to 4%. It was not a good day, and has not been a good day since those announced tariffs, and to some degrees pulled them back a bit. But there's so much confusion, and it's not because it's because of what's stated. We're told, well, this is going forward. No, it's not. Yes, it is. And I have to say, I'm a bit confused, and like everyone, all other economists, I think, are as well.
Well, what do we take away from, President Trump has said a lot of things, but one of the things that he has said recently is, whatever they charge us, we're charging them, adding that that's the fair way, right, to go about it. I would imagine it's not quite as simple as that, though, right?
No, it's not. No, and here's the. It's not a tragedy, but I'll label it a tragedy. Americans support tariffs. They say, well, good, we support that. Well, the problem is, you've heard of zero-sum game where one nation wins, the other loses, and the sum is zero. In this case, the negatives, both negatives, the tariff implementer and the tariff target, both lose. This is a lose-lose, not a win-win. It's not lose-win, it's lose-lose.
All right, so we have seemingly gone from this across-the-board tariffs to talking about reciprocal ones. Big picture, what does that mean to you, a reciprocal tariff?
It's somewhat meaningless. In other words, they were implemented initially because of the idea of stopping fentanyl across the border and stopping what was called illegal migration across the border, Canadian border and the Mexican border. Now we've sort of quit talking about that. We've talked about reciprocal tariffs, and there are tariffs. For example, in Canada, Canada has on dairy products moving into Canada excessive tariffs. Those need to be reduced. And if the goal of the president is to get them to reduce their tariffs, then he's doing something correct. If his goal is to leave them there and get into a big fight, it's not right. I mean, in other words, we will be losers, and the losers, and your audience, a lot of it in Nebraska, Nebraska's a big loser. Why is that? Because we're an agricultural state, a manufacturing state. We depend on exports, and if they retaliate, they being Mexico, 50%, almost 50, 45 to 50% of the agricultural products and livestock from Nebraska go to Mexico. If President Sheinbaum decides, okay, you want to play that game? Okay, we'll play with it. We'll erect barriers, trade tariffs on agricultural products that we lose. There are lots to be lost there. Now the difference is that was done back in 2018 when those tariffs were implemented then. But there was money there to provide support for the farmers that were damaged. And there's not the money there this time. How do we support the farmer who are the rancher who's hurt this time?
Given the back and forth and this talk about tariffs, I think there are folks who are sitting on the edge of their seats, wondering how this April 2nd Liberation Day is going to play out, especially based on, kind of what's been said up to this point and how things have been done up to this point. Again, we're recording the day before April 2nd. Have you really thought about how you think the day is going to shake out, Ernie? I mean,
I dream about it. How's that?
Okay, so talk to us about your dreams, Ernie.
Though it's more likely a nightmare. In other words, the outcome is potentially very negative. And what do I mean by that? If there's retaliation and one tit for tat, all of a sudden you have these, and as poet Robert Frost said, when you build a wall, you better find out what you're walling in and walling out. And I'm not certain those who are implementing tariffs know what they're walling in and walling out. And I mean, in other words, do we want to raise bananas in Nebraska or Iowa? No, we don't wish to do that. We trade for bananas. We trade for items that we cannot produce effectively, efficiently.
He's talked about getting all countries involved. Okay, and
well, they will be,
and that's part of a plan. So talk a little bit about that in terms of how things could shake out on April 2nd. Why all countries, and how do you see that working out to people's advantage versus there's a no-win here, right?
Well, if all nations say, well, let's come together, let's reduce tariffs, and there are, some of our trading partners do have excessive tariffs. We do need for them to reduce them. China, for example, Canada, for example, again, back to the dairy products into Canada, very high tariffs there. They need to be reduced. But this is not going to get that outcome that we might anticipate. I don't think you'll get a reduction in tariffs. I think there are other ways of doing it.
Okay, all right. I read that doesn't the U.S. benefit by having large trade imbalances with the rest of the world?
Benefit.
What would you say to that? So, but doesn't the U.S. benefit by having large trade imbalances with the rest of the world? I read that somewhere. How would you respond to that?
Well, in some cases there are advantages. In other words, the imbalance results in other nations having dollars out there, and they use those dollars to buy our bonds, for example. They use their dollars to invest in our stock market. They use it to invest. The dollar is the reserve currency of the globe. So individuals, those dollars are more valuable than other dollars, other things equal. So using those dollars, they come back here. Now, if they didn't come back here, then we've got a real problem. Okay. If they weren't coming back. China, for example, has been investing in our bonds for quite some time. Now they've changed that. Now they're moving into gold. Instead of buying our bonds, they're buying gold now. And so that puts a little bit of a dampening impact on our bond market,
Okay. What is a value-added tax?
Well, it's a tax that is added on at stages of production. In other words, you buy the product, for example, $100, and you add $20 value to the tax, so your tax is on that value added, not on the initial $100. So it's typically done at stages of production or sales.
Okay, you've mentioned that maybe the way that President Trump is going about all this stuff with tariffs might not be the right way to go about it. I guess at this point I'm wondering, especially since he's mentioned all countries, how do you suppose that some of the countries are going to go about trying to avoid these new tariffs?
Well, for example, China, instead of sending directly to the U.S. and getting the tariff, they send through Vietnam. They send through Mexico. That's one way of avoiding it. But here's a big way of avoiding it, and China can do it. We can't do it. We're not. They can devalue their currency. So if you devalue their currency, suppose we add a 10% tariff on Chinese products. They could devalue their currency by 10 or even more percentage. Thus, the product remains the same price, so it doesn't deter imports. The idea is somehow we need to reduce imports. Well, I'll tell the president, and again, I support a lot of his initiatives. This is just not one of them. And if you want to reduce imports, go into recession. That'll reduce imports. I mean, during recessions, our imports come down faster than our exports come down. So, in fact, our trade deficit comes down. Why is that? Because Americans, we're consumers, and we want that bottle of French wine, for example. And no disrespect to Grand Island wine, but when we go into recession, we might be buying Grand Island wine instead of the French wine, which is more expensive, and that's generally a trade-off, of course, we make as Americans. We have a taste for some of those imported goods.
Well, I think the hope is that people would buy that wine that you mentioned instead of their favorite. I think that's part of the hope here, that we'll keep things more in our country in terms of the buyer, right?
But Kathy, the President Biden invited this as well. President Biden, reshoring. That's not going to happen in any time frame of your audience. I mean, President Biden and President Trump will not be around when the next automobile plant moves from Canada to the U.S. It takes 4, 5, up to 7, 8 years to open that, to move that plant from Canada to the U.S. That reshoring, I'm at the age where I'm like, well, I may not see it. I hope my grandkids do. I hope my kids do. I mean, what time frame are we looking at? And by the way, it's not going to happen anyway.
Okay.
I mean, even if we had that time.
I want to talk about the allies, because I know that we have not only viewers in Nebraska, but people across the country who, whether you agree or disagree with President Trump and some of his policies and so forth, are concerned about the way he's gone about this, and you mentioned that yourself. Talk a little bit about the relational aspect in all of this, right? Here we had these relationships set up in a certain way, and now, based on some of the things that we're hearing, we're running the risk of destroying, might be kind of harsh. I have really no idea how this is going to shake out, but talk about the relationships with the allies and then what that does or what that could do in turn to us. Well,
you're certainly getting outside my area of expertise, but it's certainly, we're already seeing some individuals that are not traveling to some nations, Canada, Europe, and they don't feel welcome. So that's an impact. Now, that again's outside my area of expertise, but nonetheless, I mean, President Trump wrote The Art of the Deal. Ernie Goss did not write The Art of the Deal. If this is a negotiating strategy, and later on all the nations say, you know, President Trump, you're right. We're reducing our tariffs. You bring yours down. All of them come down. Good outcome. But I don't see it happening. I see it the opposite. I thought, well, you raise yours, we'll raise ours, and we'll show you who's in charge here. I mean, we're seeing Mexico and Canada already moving to offset some of the impacts by you say reciprocal. How about retaliation? The other R word. That's my fear, is retaliation. Even if we didn't receive retaliation, we still don't. Back to David Ricardo, that was in 1817, British economists, the law of comparative advantage. Produce what you're best at, what you're effective at, trade for those items that you're not best at.
Any country in favor of this that you know of?
Well, there are nations, certainly. I mean, the mercantilism's been around. I mean, Japan, you saw how that outcome. I mean, Japan was locked into similar, I don't say it was this way, but nonetheless, and it stymied their economy for still. I mean, Japan is yet to recover. I lived in Tennessee when the fear was Japan's taking over Tennessee. Didn't happen. China's taking over the U.S. It didn't happen, not going to happen. It's fear. We are productive. Don't fear competition, engage competition. We can outcompete them. Now, we can't outcompete them, back to my banana issue. We can't do that.
Right. You bring up a good word, though, and that is one of fear. It's the whole uncertainty, right? Whether it's tariffs or something else, people can often be fearful of things that they are uncertain about. So when you talk about reciprocal, or the other R word, retaliation, I mean, obviously that's going to drum up some concern in folks. You're pretty good at projecting. You know, we asked you not too long ago about what was going to happen in 2025. If we continue down this path and one of the potential for retaliation. What are we looking like 3 months from now, 6 months from now? And then I'll follow up with another question after you answer that.
Well, the economy is slowing down. There's little doubt about that. It's been slowing down for some time now. And the uncertainty is producing some of that slowdown. But we also have other issues faced us where the Biden administration overspent in certain programs, and that money's still sloshing around. It is. And Elon Musk is trying to get at some of that, but I don't think it'll happen. I mean, in other words, the overspending, we're talking about, Kathy, the deficit is running at the mammoth deficits. I'm talking about not the trade deficits, the budget deficit. It's unaffordable, and it's going to produce higher interest rates. It's going to cause the Fed to raise interest rates. And back to the tariffs. Tariffs do put upward pressure on prices. So what does that mean for us? It means the Fed, the Federal Reserve, is going to be compelled to raise interest rates. Now, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, but it's going to be in the second half of this year, the latter part of this year. The Fed, in my judgment, is going to be raising rates. Now, right now, the Fed is on the side of reducing rates, but I think that would be a big mistake because, again, there's some that say it's a one-off price increase. No, it's not a one-off. There will be a one-time increase followed by a two-time increase. In other words, when you reduce competition, you put upward pressure on prices. That's what we're talking about, reducing competition.
All right, I want you, in the minutes that we have remaining, I want you to talk specifically with our viewers right now who are wondering not just about what's going to happen months down the road, but what's going to happen next week, right? So what should consumers be thinking about now? What could they be doing to maybe, there's enough out of our control. What could they be doing that's in their control to make their world, their little worlds, a better place?
They're already doing it. Consumption has already been pulling back. Consumers are pulling back, particularly the 80% versus the 20%. The 80% that did not do well during the Biden years, and now they're not doing well under the Trump years as well, and they're pulling back on their consumption. But one thing certainly is prepare yourself for higher interest rates. Again, later on, not in the windshield out there 100 yards. We're talking about the end of the year, raising interest rates. So inflation, we're going to see more. Inflation has not died down. So has not gone to the target of the Federal Reserve, 2%. It's not there. And this summer, the Fed meets with their review of their policies. They could, in fact, say, that target we had of 2%, we're going to raise it. All of a sudden, wow, okay, that makes everything a lot better for some people. Obviously, the Fed, and obviously the government, the federal government, that owes $37 trillion. Well, if you're a debtor, you'd like to see, something like that happen, of course, and we could. That's a possibility.
Okay, final question. How, in short, how did Trump come into the second term, and how do you think he's going to go out?
Well, I think he's going to realize he came in blazing saddles, if I could say that, use that term, guns a-blazing. And I don't, as an economist, by nature, I'm not guns a-blazing. I'm an economist, and so we're not blazing anything. But nonetheless, he's talked about taking the eyes off of what we need to be looking at. And yesterday he talked about seeking a third term. That's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's not possible. It won't happen. Don't engage in these. Now again, I'm out of my expertise, but it's frustrating. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about getting your 2017 tax cuts through Congress at the end of the year. That needs to be done. And my fear is that by doing all these things, throwing all these balls up in the air, you'll not get the important work done, which is extending those tax cuts forward. They expire at the end of 2025. You are talking about a huge tax increase if that's not done. I'm afraid he's degrading his support by these, in some cases, outlandish, like saying I'm going to seek a third term. Now, there's no reason to say that. I mean, I'll seek a first term. How's that? I'm more likely to become first-term president than he is a third-term president. Let's put it that way. I'll put money on that one.
All right, in the minute we have remaining, you get the final say. I have an economist here today. What else are you thinking about that you want Nebraskans to know? You got about a minute.
Okay, this idea that somehow we can all waltz past or walk past the graveyard, whistling past the graveyard, as I'll call it. We have to face up to the fact that we've overspent previous years. All Americans, from the baby that was born yesterday to the oldest American, has to pitch in. We say, we're not going to touch Social Security. You're going to have to touch Social Security. We're not going to touch this. We're not going to touch. Everything has to be on the table. Everybody's taking, well, we can't take that off the table. We have to take it. I'm at a university. We have to be a participant in bearing the burden of overspending. We have overspent. Now there is the AI, artificial intelligence, that is some potential there for increased productivity. That's a good thing.
Talking about reciprocal tariffs and other things with Ernie Goss today. I want to thank Ernie for sharing your time and expertise and always being so willing to come in. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me, Kate.
Yeah, you bet. And the students who are working so hard behind the scenes. And of course to all of you for watching. As we close, a look at a fundraising event for a dog rescue as seen through the lens of Mary Pritchard, a junior here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issue program produced by UNO Television and the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours, or send an email to consider.this@unomaha.edu.
There seems to be like this gathering right here of really great minds and really great ideas.
I think it's a great moment, to teach a UNO student.
Being here, I get like a jump start on my journalism career.
I found a lot of people that are interested in like the same things as me.
Sort of a lifetime changing career for me, and the best way it could happen.
This is Frank. Say hi, Frank.
Hi there.
Frank works in a dungeon. Well, it kind of looks like one. A room filled with all sorts of fancy gizmos and knickknacks. Anyways, he's been here a while. He builds cabinets, camera rigs, video walls. He also saves lives.
I'm a burning bus. When I was just a wee lad.
I think that's made up. Regardless, without Frank, the UNO television studio wouldn't run. Thanks, Frank.
Discover a world of wonder in the heart of Fontenelle Forest, where nature comes alive and adventure awaits. Explore the natural beauty and diversity of our ecosystem. Fontenelle Forest is a place where memories are made and the magic of nature never fades. Visit fontenelleforest.com to find operational hours and ticket prices.